So, Shirish, couple of questions about Voice 2.0. I see a lot of vendors that have announced the initiative. Nortel, Alcatel, Microsoft is also promoting Telco 2.0
Correct.
or Voice 2.0 at the booth here at the show. So you have various different vendor approaches, such as, for instance, some of the vendors, such as Broadsoft, are letting the end users come into their application portals and select the application they want. And then there are vendors like yourself that are just facilitating these applications coming through the developers, and then the end choice basically is it's service provider's choice to see which applications they want to select. So there are various different approaches doing Voice 2.0. What would you say are the merits of each of those approaches?
So Jahangir, thanks a lot, first of all, for talking to me. As you know, Sylantro has been a pioneer in the area of web services. We were among, or probably the first company way back in 2005 when we announced our web services enabled platform for voice applications. And so it's first thing is it's heartening to see that all of the companies almost a year and a half, 2 years later are now starting to move in the same direction, which is talking about web services as well as web-enabled applications that are integrating voice. In terms of the taxonomy of what different approaches there are, I think I'm seeing three paths. So one path is what I call the over-the-top service provider type model, and the over-the-top service provider model basically is where companies like Ribbit and some of the other players we are seeing like Jaja, Jackster and so on are building their own services that ride on top of the existing incumbent telco services, and their idea is to create a full-blown subscriber community from scratch with compelling applications, which is great innovation from that standpoint. The second approach that we are seeing in the industry is what is called a public marketplace approach, and I think the idea there is to seed the marketplace with lots and lots of different applications with the hope that end consumers will pick these applications and understand how they attach to the phone and start using them. The third approach, which is more of an inside-out approach, and where Sylantro is focused, is what we call a operator catalog based approach, where we are taking all the innovative ideas around web services and how applications get built and designed, and how voice gets integrated into other broader contexts like the web, but working very closely in conjunction with the operators to help deliver those applications to the marketplace. But we believe that the biggest installed base and the biggest opportunity still exists with the installed base of the operators, our customers, who we work with every day. And that has given us a vantage point that shows that they are definitely interested in this innovation. They are interested in vendors who will solve their real problems like provisioning, billing, support, in addition to the innovative application. So the third approach, the catalog-based approach, which clearly we are working towards, is to work very closely in conjunction with the operators, use the web services and web concepts to build and deliver these applications, but very much aligned with the service provider's model of how they tend to approach the marketplace.
As far as I know, Sylantro was one of the first ones that brought in some web mashups on top of a telecom platform. So you have a lot of experience here compared to other vendors. What have you seen over the last couple of years in terms of how the developer preferences have changed, the telecom developer preferences in terms of in terms of the way they want to monetize things, or in terms of the APIs they require, etc., etc.?
I think the big realization we've had as we've started, we started 2 years ago talking about web services. We saw that we are able to tap into a broader community of developers, and by the same token, we are also seeing a transition. So there were two communities at that time. One is the traditional telecom developer that understands, the traditional telco models, the telco protocols like CSTA and SIP and so on. And then you have the completely other end of the spectrum, which is the web developer, who has absolutely no idea of how to integrate voice into their applications. We are starting to see developers emerge who are what I would call kind of multi-modal type developers, in the sense that they are starting to move towards the middle. So there are web developers who are starting to say, oh, if I can consume a simple web service that lets me do a click to call or do a voice blast, it's a great way to introduce some additional dynamics into my web application. By the same token, you have the telco developers who are kind of narrowed down and niched into this, rocket science environment of building applications, who are saying, oh, by doing this, I'm using the same tools that a web developer is using today. So you're starting to see developers with multiple skills starting to emerge in this mix, which is really a sign of convergence starting to come in at the grassroots level as well. So I think the preference at the end of the day, where I've been a developer myself, and my preference has always been to be mainstream, which is I want to develop skills that allow me to keep my job no matter what changes happen. Second, I don't want hurdles to be building my application. So I don't want a big shelf system under my desk. I want to build with the internet and with the phone without having any hardware infrastructure, any big investment on my part. Let me just focus on the innovation. So I think the preference of developers is to be mainstream, use standard off-the-shelf tools, and then most importantly, to build the applications that do have the a strong opportunity to be monetized ultimately, because at the end of the day, there is a coolness factor to building apps, but the reality is most developers will dwindle away unless you show them the real revenue opportunities at the end of that tunnel. So I think those are the three, we tend to pick developers who are focused on all three of those aspects of application development.
Do you see the developers really using Web 2.0 APIs and Flash APIs, or are they still, working with the traditional, the SOAP and Parley and all those APIs that you had previously in telecoms world?
Right. So I think Parley X was probably the first step towards moving the traditional telco world to more web services oriented. So some of the carriers we talked to are very interested and continue to evolve around Parley X. The developers that we are talking to are definitely becoming more and more web services savvy, and it's also because the standard off-the-shelf tools that you're seeing are becoming more and more web services savvy. So you pick your typical Eclipse environment or your NetBeans IDE or a .NET environment. These have all got very, very streamlined ways in which if somebody has published WSDL SOAP-based services or REST-based services, it's very easy for these tools to consume them and for them to use them like any other API stubs. So I think that's where we are seeing people starting to consume the web services more and more.
What about the preferences of these developers along the lines of the open source options? There are so many open source VoIP platforms out there, and a lot of the developers have successfully used these platforms. What would that mean for a vendor like Sylantro going forward?
So I think it goes back to my comment, which is if you want to cultivate developers, you have to remove all the hurdles around the innovation and help them connect to the revenues. The reason why open source has been so successful is because there is no barrier to entry to accessing that information, downloading it, even changing it, and creating your innovation around it. There are very few hurdles to, today a developer can pretty much with a $0 investment build an interesting application that could find a very remarkable application somewhere. So I think from our standpoint, the thing that we are looking at is how do we reduce the hurdles to that innovation from happening. And I think that is it's not as much about open source versus closed. I think if we show developers where the revenue opportunities are, and you show them in a way where the tools are standard off the shelf and you're not getting narrowed down into a skill set that will not be transferable and marketable in the end, I think we can achieve the same thing. So it's not as much about open source or vendor specific as it is about, are the technologies I'm working with transferable, and if I invest my 15 hours building an application here versus on an open source platform, am I attacking the same opportunity?